Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Kaiju fans, welcome to the first session of Kaiju Masterclass. My name is Erik, and I'm one of the co-producers of Kaiju Masterclass, a deep dive into the history and craft of Japanese giant monster films and television. Again, I am joined by my co-producers, Patrick Galvan, Matt Parmley, Kyle Gilmore, Steve Ryfle, John DeSentis, and Kyle Byrd. Kyle, tell our audience, our live streaming audience, a little bit about how this online convention, Kaiju Masterclass, came to be in the first place.
Okay, so I guess its origins would date back to April-ish, when the YouTube channel Monstrosities Vlog from Matt Burkett made a video about, I guess, kind of how lately there haven't been a lot of, really, really popular, I guess, authors or content that has a lot of really good information in it. Certain home video releases or streaming talk shows that, won't be named. We're kind of things we're getting more information light. And our friend Tom, who a lot of us know, Tom Gwelly, he reposted on his wall, and he was like, yeah, there's a lot of guys that are really into this stuff and doing good work. How come nobody ever talks to them? And then Steve Ryfle commented on that and got a little discourse going with Erik here. And they were talking about, what if there was this kind of an event that could just be about the behind the scenes of, this genre, these franchises, that we know and love, a little bit, something more about, how these productions were made, maybe one day it's something that we could do like on a university campus, and, we could really kind of dissect the people that made the films, or, their messages or subtexts. And
well, not dissect the people that made the films.
Well, yeah. Right, yeah, not literally dissect them. That would be horrifying.
This isn't medical school. This is Kaiju.
but yeah, just what if there was an event that was all about the behind the scenes of this stuff? And he and Erik went back and forth a little bit, and then a day or two later, I got a message in my inbox from Steve saying, "Hey, what if we actually did like maybe a virtual event?" COVID has really, taken its toll on people. At this point, G-Fest wasn't canceled, but it felt like it probably would. And then from there, we just kept, me, him, and Erik just kept bringing on other people on board, these lovely folks here. And so that's really how it came to be. It was something that I don't think any of us ever, thought we would be getting, as big of a guest roster or anything like this. But I mean, enough of me yapping. So let's take a look and let's see maybe what exactly Kaiju Masterclass will have in store for everyone this weekend.
Kaiju, the giant monsters of Japan. These strange beasts have enthralled the world for nearly 70 years across every medium imaginable. And their history is one both deep and rich, spanning eras, cultures, and continents. But it is an enigmatic past often locked away in mystery. Until now. For the next 3 days, you are invited to hear from the historians and storytellers, the craftsmen and artisans, The men and women whose contributions have given life to the monsters, machines, and heroes of Japanese science fiction and fantasy television and cinema. Are you ready? Shusuke Kaneko, Shinji Higuchi, Shinichi Wakasa, Michiharu Oshima, Bear McCreary, David Arnold, Tab Murphy, Ricardo Delgado, Carlos Huante, Norman England, Ed Godchewski, Stuart Galbraith IV, Brad Warner, Allison Adams, Pat Saperstein, Stan Hyde, Sean Lincolnback, John LeMay, Kevin Derendorf, Patrick Macias, Bob Eggleton, and Matt Frank. So now it's time to hear the untold stories and uncover the secrets lost to history. We are honored to have you join us for the world's very first session of Kaiju Masterclass.
Really great video giving you a little taste of what's in store for you and some of the great guests we have lined up for this weekend. You guys are in for a real treat. And by the way, I just want to take a moment to give a huge shout out to Matt Burkett of the Monstrosities vlog, who put together that great video. We're flashing up on the screen some information about how you can find out about his work on YouTube. That's where his vlog is based out of. And here you see his Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Matt, thank you so very much for putting that awesome video together for us. That really sets the tone. And we appreciate you being such a great friend to Kaiju Masterclass. So now that you all know out there a little bit more about what Kaiju Masterclass is and what to expect from it and who to expect from it over the next several days, let's find out a little bit more about the people that are putting this online convention together. And I'll start with myself. Again, my name is Erik Homenick, and if you know me, you know I'm that Akira Ifukube guy. I am the webmaster of akiraifukube.org, which is the official English language website about the famous film composer, kaiju composer, Akira Ifukube. That's my website, akiraifukube.org. I'm also on Facebook and on Twitter for the website. And I'm also a PhD candidate at the University of California, San Diego. And my doctoral dissertation is focusing on, would you believe, the music of Akira Ifukube and its narrative importance in his kaiju films. So that's who I am. Let's find out a little bit more from my co-producers here at Kaiju Masterclass. Let's start with Patrick Galvan. Patrick, tell us a little bit about you and how did you get involved in the kaiju genre to begin with?
My name is Patrick Galvan. I am something of a film journalist and a film historian who specializes in Japanese cinema, namely Japanese science fiction. And I guess my biggest accolades is that I've just written a lot of articles about the genre for such websites as Sci-Fi Wire, which is the official news site for the Sci-Fi Channel, and for the fan website TohoKingdom.com. As for how I got into Japanese science fiction, believe it or not, I got into the genre a little later in my childhood than most people did. I did not have a large collection of Godzilla VHS tapes when I was a kid. I did not watch a lot of Godzilla films on TV. The first film actually called Godzilla that I ever saw was the infamous TriStar Godzilla from Roland Emmerich. I did not even know that there was such a thing as a Japanese Godzilla at all at that point. In fact, it wasn't until a couple years later when Godzilla 2000 came out in the theaters, and my family and I heard the title and mistook it for a sequel to the TriStar film, and then when I got into the theater and the film started playing, that I realized that there was, in fact, a Japanese Godzilla film, a Japanese Godzilla in the first place. And then later on that same year, I caught a double feature of Godzilla versus King Ghidorah and Godzilla versus Mothra 92 on the Sci-Fi Channel. And that made me realize there was a whole franchise of Japanese Godzillas, which predated the Matthew Broderick film. And I've just been a fan of the series ever since. And a couple of years ago, I decided to start writing about it. And it's just been an ongoing passion of mine ever since.
Yeah, really great, Patrick. And let's talk a little bit briefly about your writing, because I think what we all appreciate about what you do is that you take a real, if I may use the word, scholarly approach to the genre. You've written some great articles that really look at these classic films from from a just a very learned angle, I think, and that's something definitely that the kaiju community, if you will, needs more of. How do you hope that your writing and your research into these films and just Japanese cinema in general, how do you hope that will contribute to future scholarship of these films?
Well, I think that the number one goal that I've always wanted to do with my articles and my interviews, the handful that I've done, is share new information and new ways of thinking about the genre and the people who made them, and to promote thinking about the films and the people who are behind them. That's really of course I primarily do this stuff for myself because it's fun for me as a writer. But if my articles encourage people to maybe look at an artist in a new light, or maybe think about a film they have in a way they haven't thought about before, then I'd say my writing has been very, very successful. I don't really have any like long-term goals as far as what my writing would do, like say years and years from now. But it's primarily what I do. I do it primarily for myself. And if I can encourage a little bit of extra thinking from people who read it, then I'd say I've done my job well.
Well, I think you are doing your job well, and that's of course why you are one of the co-producers of Kaiju Masterclass, of course, because you do that so well. Final question for you, Patrick. What does being a part of the Kaiju Masterclass production team mean for you?
What it means most to me is what I'm especially grateful for in being a part of this organization team is that I'm working with a large number of people that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. For example, Steve Ryfle, who is one of the organizers here. Steve, him and Ed Gottschalski, they were the guys who, more than anybody else, influenced my personal outlook and how I think about the films and write about them. And also, Kyle Byrd and Matt Parmley, their podcast I'll let them talk about it, but their podcast is by far my favorite of all the Godzilla podcasts out there. And I'm very much an admirer of Erik's website, and John's concerts are terrific. I'm working with a large number of people who I have the utmost respect for, and for me, that's probably one of the biggest pleasures of being involved in this convention.
Thank you very much, Patrick. We're happy to have you on board, of course. Let's move on to Mr. Kyle Gilmore. By the way, I want to make sure that I mention that the introductory video that you saw at the very beginning of our broadcast here in the style of the Godzilla 54 opening credits, that great video was produced by Kyle Gilmore and John DeSentis. And I don't know if you noticed, but we're all wearing our Kaiju Masterclass t-shirts. And in fact, Kyle Gilmore's got his on. He's the guy that designed the logo. Kyle, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I'm a independent filmmaker and artist living in Louisiana. First of all, since it's up on the screen, I'd like to plug the Horror Chronicles. The Horror Chronicles is an ongoing comic series that features gothic horror characters such as Dracula and Frankenstein's monster in a narrative meant to appeal to children. So I kind of jokingly call it Universal Monsters for Kids. The main goal is to introduce children to these characters and the literary sources behind them. So issue 1 and 2 are available to purchase at thehorrorchronicles.com. I am currently wrapping up issue 3, and we will be releasing a motion comic edit of issue 1 later this month, featuring music provided by our very own John DeSentis. So be sure to keep an eye on thehorrorchronicles.com. But as for me, I guess kind of the question everybody kind of is wondering is like, how did you come upon the Godzilla franchise or anything? And so for me, I remember it was back in 1993, Jurassic Park had just come out. And so I was really obsessed with dinosaurs and anything that had to do with something dinosaur-like. And so my parents had started to rent us me and my brother, a couple of dinosaur movies and stuff. And so one of them that they rented one time from our local Blockbuster was a film called Dinosaurus. It's a 1960 film. But before Dinosaur started, there was a preview for a Godzilla movie, Godzilla 1985. And I'd never heard of Godzilla before. And if I had, I kind of assumed it was another kind of gorilla monster, kind of like King Kong. And anyway, but I saw the trailer and I thought that was pretty interesting. And I remember my dad kind of mentioning to my mother, was like, hey, I don't think the kids have ever seen a Godzilla movie, so maybe we should, maybe rent one or something next time we go to Blockbuster. They might like that. And little did he know what he was about to do. But he next time we went to Blockbuster, they saw Godzilla 1985. They rented it for us, and that's kind of where it started. I became obsessed with Godzilla, and I wanted to see every Godzilla film that was ever made. And by the time I think the TriStar film was coming along in '98, I had seen the 22 Godzilla films that had been produced by Toho from '54 to '95. And so I was extremely excited for the TriStar film and rather disappointed after the film. And I kind of thought at that point, well, the Japanese Godzilla was dead. I didn't think there was going to be anything else in the future for this character. And then I got to looking on Amazon one day, and I found this book called Japan's Favorite Monster by this Steve Ryfle guy.
Oh, yeah.
And anyway, and so that, I think, was something that really grew that interest even more, because I had seen all those names in the credits of these films. And now this is the first time I'd ever found in any Godzilla book where there were pictures of these people who had made these films. And I got to learn about those people and learn about the process of making the films, and learn that there was so much more, to Godzilla than I ever really thought, with the Lucky Dragon #5 and the atomic bomb tests and everything. And there was just so much wealth of information. I even credit this book to being one of the things that inspired me to want to become a filmmaker, because I was reading about how films were made. And then I remember there was one thing in the introduction of the book that Steve had mentioned. As this book goes to print, Toho has just announced that they'll be making another Godzilla film called Godzilla 2000 Millennium. And I was like, what? So then,
So you have a long history with this, and it's very interesting that the genre has been so influential on you in your own filmmaking endeavors. But it certainly seems like you have always had an appreciation for the backstories of the genre, the history of the genre, the stories behind the productions. So tell me, Kyle, what does being a part of Kaiju Masterclass mean for you as someone who is so interested in that aspect of the genre?
Well, it's very rewarding in the fact that a lot of you guys that are involved, you, Erik, I had known of you from ifkube.org or .com.org. I'm sorry,
yeah.
.org. Okay, I had known of you from there, and I had I had sort of known John. We've collaborated a couple times now, so. And that he's become a very good friend, and it was also a chance to get to share in a project or a program with somebody who I've admired quite a bit ever since I read his book back in 1998, and that's Steve Ryfle. And so when I found out that he was involved, I really wanted to contribute in whatever way that I could.
Well, you're a valuable member of the team, and you've really created some beautiful graphics for us, as everyone can see, as everyone can see. So it's a pleasure to have you on board. Let's move on to, you mentioned John DeSentis. Let's talk to Maestro John DeSentis, good friend of mine, good friend and colleague. John, tell us a little bit about you. Who the hell are you, John?
I was not expecting to go third, but okay. So John DeSentis, obviously conducted a few concerts, most recent of which was with Michiru Oshima. It was a joy and an honor, and we're going to be announcing a little bit of news about that tomorrow during the panel, or maybe a little bit before. We'll see. But Kaiju Crescendo we did last year together. She conducted her music, and I conducted the music of Akira Ifukube and Masaru Sato. And sort of my thing with Godzilla began with Godzilla versus Megalon, actually. I was a big dinosaur fan, much like Kyle, and my grandmother didn't know the difference between Godzilla and a T-Rex. So she brought me this video home one day. You know, she's like, "Oh, you know, there's this big T-Rex, you know, fighting another monster. Here you go. His name's Godzilla." And that was it. And before I had seen Godzilla, I had seen the original King Kong. So I remember then her being like, "Oh, well, here's a movie where Godzilla fights King Kong." And again, you know, as you get further and further away from this stuff, when it happens as you're a young kid, you tend to these details just sometimes you fill spaces in, but that's the way I remember it, was Godzilla versus Megalon and then King Kong versus Godzilla. So that just much like all of you, just kind of translated into like a lifelong just love and obsession with this stuff. And growing into an adult, you kind of, or you know what it's supposed to be an adult, you kind of, if you stick with this stuff, you sort of learn that Godzilla was not meant for children, and you learn like the backstory behind the original Godzilla, and that's what can kind of keep your interest. So one of my favorite aspects of these movies and of movies in general is the music. I write scores for independent films, and film music is my favorite type of music, like in the world. And be it John Williams, Danny Elfman, Jerry Goldsmith, Akira Ifukube, you name it. You know, it's literally like it's my favorite genre. Like I love rock and roll. I love all kinds of other music, but film music is my favorite. So I always felt that the music of these movies wasn't really getting enough love, and it was really sort of nice to kind of, you know, find someone like Erik who was so dedicated to the composer himself and has such access to the composer's sort of family and estate, and we've been able to really go on a great journey of sort of finding things out that were previously unknown. Like I would reference to Erik, Q10 from Godzilla 1954 was one of the great discoveries of me helping out with his website. So pretty much that's my top goal, is just to continue to sort of promote the artistry behind these movies, and not even just musically, but also like the special effects like Eiichi Tsuburaya and Ishiro Honda. And it's just, I want to see these movies continue to kind of grow in stature and be taken more seriously.
So I've got two questions for you, John. First question is, what is your favorite Godzilla score? And second question, what does being on the Kaiju Masterclass team, or faculty, shall we say, what does that mean to you?
Favorite Godzilla score? That's tough. You're asking me my favorite or what I think the best is?
Your favorite.
My personal favorite? Oof. There's a lot of pressure right now because the score to Godzilla 1984 is kind of up there for me, and that's not Akira Ifukube. But it'd be somewhere between, like, I would say probably the Godzilla 54, just the original, just as primal and as rudimentary as it was, Godzilla 84, and probably Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 74. Those are pretty far up there as far as the original Godzilla series goes. And what does Kaiju Masterclass mean to me? As I said before, just an opportunity to kind of get together with a like-minded group of friends, and in Steve Ryfle's case, longtime friends. I've known Steve for over 20 years, I think, at this point. And just sort of just do what we love and just talk about the things we love, and again, just kind of promote this stuff in the best possible light.
Excellent. Thank you so much, John. Thank you so very much. Now let's move on to Matt Parmley. Matt, tell us a little bit about you. Who are you? What do you do?
So I am a co-host of Kaiju Transmissions podcast with Mr. Kyle Byrd. I got into Godzilla when I was about 5 years old. I love dinosaurs, and one day my dad came home, and the way that I remember it is he told me that I'm going to show you the biggest dinosaur movie ever made, which of course was Godzilla 1985. And we rented that movie countless times on VHS from Blockbuster in a place called West Coast Video. And after that, I was really hooked. And then, of course, the Ian Thorne Godzilla book that I checked out from the public library probably 25 different times. Even though that book has a lot of misinformation, it's one of the things that alerted me to there's there's a million of these movies and these creatures that I'd never seen or heard of before. And I'm really thankful that my dad both introduced me to that and that I had supportive parents who kind of let me be me and go and search out all the Godzilla movies and bought me all the toys and all the different things. And then on top of that, I'm really thankful now that as a parent, I can share that same joy with my son who's 6. And like being able to share that with him and see these movies through his eyes is a totally different experience, because I find myself enjoying the movies a lot more watching his reactions to them. And so it's something that's always stuck with me. And there's a lot of, I would say, depth to Godzilla movies, and there's a lot of meaning behind them just for me, both personally, but also just like the history of the first film and the different themes that come out of it. And so Godzilla has always been a really important part of my life, and I'm glad that I'm able to share it with everybody here and with my son.
And what's your son's favorite Godzilla movie or favorite monster?
Oh man, I would say his favorite Godzilla movie is probably that's a tough one. I'm trying to think what we watched recently.
I asked
the tough
funny questions,
No, actually, his favorite. I'm going to answer it differently. His favorite kaiju right now has been Gamera, actually. So he loves Gamera versus Legion. He loves Gamera versus Gauss. As far as Godzilla goes, we actually just watched the original probably like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he loved it. So that was a really fun experience to see that through the eyes of a 6-year-old.
That's great. That's great. And then tell us just briefly a little bit about the Kaiju Transmissions podcast. How did you start that?
So we started the podcast. I had the idea of I knew that I wanted to start a podcast, but honestly, I had zero idea of how to go about it. Didn't know how to set it up. Didn't know the best way to even approach it. And I reached out to several of my friends who actually had at the time different podcasts of their own. And one of them was, Tom Gwelly, who we talk about all the time, and Trevor Snyder, and then Kyle Byrd. And it landed on me and Byrd coming together and kind of coming up with this idea of being able to talk about stuff that wasn't just Godzilla focused, but actually was kind of going outside the genre. So not focusing just on Godzilla, because there's so many other different monsters, there's so many other different things that are Godzilla adjacent, made by Toho Studios, made by Daiei. And we wanted to really kind of expand the horizons, because me growing up, I really focused on Godzilla. So now on the podcast, we're actually able to talk about all these different other productions and movies and TV shows that are made a lot of times by the same exact production crews. And so that was kind of Kyle's pitch, and it really just stuck. And we've been doing it for 4.5, 5 years, and I'm really thankful for it.
Awesome. And it's a top of the line podcast. I really enjoy listening to you guys. Final question for you, Matt. What does being a part of the Kaiju Masterclass faculty, we'll go ahead and use that word, mean for you?
So I think for me, it's a way to first give back to, a community that I care about. In the, 2020 has been such a crappy year for many of us. And you had, the cons, the conventions that were shut down, people were working remote, people have lost jobs, all these different things that this year has brought upon us. And for me, I care about being able to do something that I'm proud of, but also be able to reach out to community and put on something that's, for free, that they can come and they can learn about all these movies that we love and we all enjoy. And so I'm really thrilled and happy just to be able to give something back. And then in addition, to me, I've always found some of the production of the movies to be just as interesting as some of the movies themselves. I love learning about the history. I love learning about how these things came together and about the people that actually made them. And so we have some of the best guests that I think we could have found personally. And I'm just excited to be able to talk to them and talk about them and to share some of that knowledge with the people that are going to be watching this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And our guest list and our panel list is absolutely stacked, and we'll be teasing that in a few moments here. Mr. Byrd, Kyle Byrd, tell us a little bit about you and your background with Kaiju Eiga.
All right. Well, I guess like most of the people that have talked or, I'm sure tuning in, I was a dinosaur kid as a child, as a toddler. Like one of my mom's favorite stories to tell people is when I was 3 years old, asking her for a toy Parasaurolophus, which I was able to say correctly. Wow. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess I wasn't immediately hooked into Godzilla. When I was probably about 5 or so, my mom brought home some toys like the old Imperial Godzilla figure, the Imperial King Kong, the old Imperial bubble blower. If anyone remembers that, it was like you blew into Godzilla's tail and he would shoot bubbles. So I had those things a few years before I ever saw a Godzilla movie. And then my next encounter with Godzilla was I was probably about 6, New Year's Eve. My mom would take me and my brother to rent a movie. We each pick a movie. Oddly enough, it was my brother that picked out Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. I picked out Edward Scissorhands or something. So one of the things that happened is between movies, I watched probably the last third of the 1980s Blob remake, which completely petrified me. And then it was like, okay, well, next we're going to watch Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. And I had had enough monsters for the evening. And, so I spent most of the time just not even looking at the TV. And my mom was like, this is an old movie. Like, these are actually kind of like funny looking monsters. You should look. And I was like, no. And then, yeah, around the end of the movie, when Godzilla came out and fought Mechagodzilla with King Caesar, I was like, oh, this isn't scary. Like, I remember in my head thinking, like, they almost are kind of like Muppets. Anyway, and so I thought that was cool, but, I didn't really go seek it out again until about a year later. So this would have put me at about 7 years old, second grade. So this is probably like late 1992. There was a kid in my class who just was obsessed with Godzilla. And I was like, yeah, I know what Godzilla is. And, we became friends and like, I was like, oh, I made a new friend. I want to kind of like, find a way to, get to know him. So I rented Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla and Godzilla versus Gigan. And that was the end. I rented those tapes. I watched them both a bunch of times, and then it was like me and this other kid, we started playing Godzilla on the playground, and from there onward, I've seen in a couple people on our comments section saying, they remember when they were kids, renting different Godzilla movies. And so like before the internet, like you couldn't just Google Godzilla and see, oh, here's all 30 some movies, so it started with like one of my favorite memories of my grandpa, who's no longer with us, was he would just every week we would go to like a different video store and find another Godzilla movie, and we just kept going to different video stores. After we rented all of them from one place, we'd go to another place. And so it was like that, and going to the library, which is a thing we had to do before we had the internet. And so checking out the Ian Thorne book, like Matt mentioned, and just like going through any monster movie books, and like, okay, here's one we haven't found yet. We need to call every video store in the state to try and find out who has this. And so, yeah, it just spiraled out of control from there. And I was lucky enough very quickly to, by the time I was in like between second and third grade, within a year, I'd already kind of become aware of, the Japanese movies that weren't getting released here, the Bandai toys. And the reason for that was another friend of mine, my old best friend from childhood, he would always go to these comic stores, and he was telling me like, yeah, they had King Ghidorah toys and this and that. And I was like, what are you talking about? No, they don't. So my mom went to one of those stores right before my birthday, and that summer we all went and saw Jurassic Park for my birthday, which like melted everyone's brains. And then she gave me this big box full of Bandai toys, and that led, and then through those dealers, I found out about G-Fan, and then I went to my first G-Fest, then called G-Con, which was 96, and that was where they had Nakajima and Satsuma here for the first time, and I've been trying to go, I usually go every year, and that's also how I met most of these guys, that and the old message boards, what keeps me in it is an appreciation of the artistry behind the movies. Like a lot of my childhood obsessions, I never grew out of Godzilla, because because as an adult, you start to realize, okay, these were made by people with something to say. And even a movie as stupid as Godzilla versus Megalon, has...
Hey, watch it there.
it has some cultural things and under the surface that you can look at. I don't know that it's done well, but it's there,
And now here you are as a co-producer on your own convention. Briefly, what does Kaiju Masterclass mean to you, Kyle?
Well, that's a great segue. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, I was fortunate enough to kind of find out about the fandom and the people writing about it when I was a kid. So, I mean, when I was in elementary school, I knew the name Steve Ryfle. I was reading his stuff in G-Fan, him and Ed, the Illustrated Encyclopedia Godzilla, Japan's Favorite Monster. I mean, elementary school, middle school. I mean, these are books that I would take to school and read, when the other kids were reading like Goosebumps or something. So, of course, when Steve Ryfle sends me a DM and is like, hey, I want to do this, what am I going to say? No, and then all you guys too. I mean, most of you guys I've known about since before I ever met you. And I always admired John's, for example, his concerts, Erik's website, Patrick's article, and so on and so forth. And so, it's been a real pleasure, getting to meet you guys in person at conventions. And then, I think all of us are admirers of each other's work, and so I think the camaraderie that we've developed is really good. And so that's what it means to me, is just I have a real deep passion and love for these things and how they were made, and I couldn't be luckier to be doing it with the group that I have here. Excellent,
thank you so much. And then finally, a name that undoubtedly everyone's familiar with is Steve Ryfle. Steve. He probably needs no introduction in the Kaiju community, but I'm going to ask him to introduce himself anyway.
Well, my name is Steve Ryfle. I am a proud native of the city of Los Angeles, California. I've been interested in writing ever since I was very young, and interested in movies and monster movies from about the same time. So the genesis of my journey or the start of my journey, I grew up in the 70s. I'm kind of the elder statesman here. I went to see Godzilla versus the Smog Monster in its American theatrical run. I think it came to LA in 1973 when I was very small. I saw Godzilla versus Megalon in a theater as a child. I owe a lot of it. A lot of us have been thanking our parents and grandparents. And I really do want to give a shout out to my late mother, Patricia, who was a monster kid in her own right. She grew up she's a Depression era kid, but she was kind of a misfit in her own way. She read monster movie magazines and whatever was available at the time she was growing up. She always told me she had a picture of Bela Lugosi on the wall of her bedroom, and everybody thought she was weird. And I love that. And she encouraged me to watch. I remember the day we were watching television, and The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms was on. And when it first came on, she said, "I think it's Godzilla." And then she corrected herself. But the name Godzilla stuck in my head, and I had never seen one of these movies before. And that started me on the pursuit of finding these films. In those days, now we have instant access to whatever we want, whenever we want to see it. But in those days, I had to kind of do some archaeological work through the TV Guide. But over time, I saw them all on television, and as I grew up and went to college and trained myself to be a journalist. There was a period when I kind of lost because the films weren't so accessible for a long period of time. I was always interested in them, and I would always talk about them, and people would, make fun of you for liking such a thing. I remember going with my girlfriend to see Godzilla in 1985, and she turned to me in the theater and she says, "You really like this, don't you?" I was like, I had a big old grin on my face. She thought we were there to laugh at it, but I was really digging it. And but it wasn't until my wife, who was then my fiance, brought home a VHS copy of Godzilla vs. Biollante when it first came out, and it was available in rental stores. And that's when I I became aware of the 90s Godzillas, and it sort of set me on this path of wanting to, it reignited this desire to learn more about these films. Because even as a child, I used to go to bookstores. I've told this story where I'd go up to the counter and say, "Do you have a book about Godzilla?" And in those days, I used to love reading things like The Origins of Marvel Comics by Stan Lee, and there was a book about the the making of Jaws, but there wasn't so much information of this type, out there. And I would ask them about a Godzilla book, and they would laugh at me. Why would there be a Godzilla book? I said, well, because everybody likes Godzilla, don't they? No, you're a weirdo. So, I used to wear, from the Monster Times, I ordered a Godzilla t-shirt through the mail. The kids would laugh at you. So it's just amazing to see this fandom and this genre become so kind of mainstream, even though it's, it's still kind of on the periphery to a certain extent. Anyway, fast forward, I became a journalist, started writing about film. And I was at the LA Times, and a lot of my colleagues were writing books, mostly about true crime cases that they were covering. And I was trying to figure out what I wanted to write about. And there was a picture of Godzilla on the cover of the Village Voice, used as a political metaphor. And I went in, and I remember telling my colleagues at the Times that I was going to write a book about Godzilla, and they just laughed me out of the room. But I did it. I used that as a motivator, a way to dive deep into these films. And so that's the start of this whole thing. I wrote the Japan's Favorite Monster, which was originally Godzilla, the unauthorized biography. That came out in the late 90s. And through this journey, I've met so many amazing people who've become close friends. Some of them are colleagues, people like Stuart Galbraith and Ed Godziszewski, and who I've gone on to collaborate with on so many projects. And people like, we're talking on this call with John and Kyle G, who I remember corresponding with, both of you. I remember meeting John when he was very young and corresponding with Kyle, it had to have been at least 10, 15 years ago. And so it's been this wonderful passion. It's kind of an avocation, I guess, but I've also tried to do it because I'm a professional writer and a professional journalist. I try to approach this in a professional manner. And my goal in writing about these films is to reach out beyond the fandom, the converted, and to show the film community at large. And I think, we've been successful to a certain extent, that this is cinema with a capital C, and that these films have content that's worthy of a second look, and that there's historical and political subtext and interesting ideas going on there. And so that's kind of, I've matured over the years. You start off as everyone does, naturally, being so into these films because of the spectacle of them, the destruction and the monsters and everything, all the imagination going on. But as John, I think, was saying too, you as you grow, you learn to appreciate them on different levels and a little more deeply.
Well, you're certainly one of the preeminent Kaiju and Godzilla scholars in the West. And of course, we here are also just happy to and honored, frankly, to work with you, Steve. My question for you is, what does Kaiju Masterclass mean for you personally?
Well, there wouldn't be, if there, even though my professional and personal goal in writing about these films and talking about them in an audio commentary or working on a documentary film or even in this convention project, my goal is always to reach, like I said, beyond the core fandom. But if it weren't for that core fandom, I wouldn't have, no one would want to read a book that I wrote or an article that I wrote or listen to a commentary that I recorded with Ed. So in a way, I feel like this is a chance to, like others have said, to give something back, hopefully a piece of quality entertainment content. And again, as Matt was saying, COVID has just upended life, not only for, the G-fan community and the fandom community at large. All these big events that we normally would attend, not just G-Fest, but Comic-Con, all kinds of things that tend to go on throughout the year are, they're on hold for the time being. And so, it's not a one-to-one substitute, but I think this is a great approximation of that experience. And we have, it's been so rewarding. As I've said, have been fortunate enough over the years in writing about these films and interviewing people and meeting people to have made some wonderful friendships. And so when you're pulling together an event like this, you reach out to those friends and you tell them what you're trying to do, and you share this idea. And it's been overwhelming, the positive response we've received, the support that we've received, and that's largely why we have such an amazing guest list. So it's in part a way to give something back to the community that has supported the work that I've been doing, because it's kind of this crazy passion that we all have. And there's a part of it that, even now people will still kind of look at you a little funny when you tell them that you're, writing a book about the politics of the Godzilla series. But more and more, there's greater appreciation and understanding that there's some real substance here. It's really interesting ideas going on.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's so interesting. The stories about the rental videos. I mean, me and my brother Brett grew up with monster movies, and I have to give a shout out to my mom Karen and my dad Larry, who provided these videos and films to us as kids. They have a lot to answer for. So love to all of you. All right, excellent. Now let's talk a little bit about Kaiju Masterclass and our social media presence and basically our schedule. Kaiju Masterclass, you can look at our full convention schedule at kaijumasterclass.com. If you click on the schedule page, you'll see what we've got lined up for you tonight, because our first interview is tonight, and that's with legendary monster maker Shinichi Wakasa. So stay tuned for that. Tomorrow we're going from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Same thing on Sunday from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then at 7 p.m. on Sunday, we're going to do an informal wrap-up show. So join us for that. But if you want to take a look at what our schedule offerings are, go to kaijumasterclass.com, click on schedule. But we're going to talk a little bit about what we have in store for you tonight and throughout the weekend. We're going to go around the table here and have our co-producers tease some of these panels. Let's start with Byrd. What do we got coming up tonight and first thing tomorrow?
All right. Well, tonight in 14 minutes, Shinichi Wakasa will be joining Steve for an interview about his career and the creative process when he designs and makes all the amazing monsters that he has. Tomorrow morning, 9 p.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Central, noon Eastern. We have David Arnold, who will be joining John DeSentis for a discussion about his scores for Godzilla 98 and some of his other films. And following that at 10 o'clock Pacific, 12 p.m. Central, 1 p.m. Eastern, we will have a rundown of Toho's history of tokusatsu television. So a complete look at their decades and decades of kaiju and tokusatsu television programs by Kevin Derendorf, author of Kaiju for Hipsters. So it'll be a fun morning.
All right. Thank you very much. Next on the list is Matt Parmley, who's going to tell us a little bit more of what's happening on Saturday, tomorrow.
Oh, I forgot one.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. So an hour after that, we'll have a discussion with Pat Saperstein and Allison Adams, moderated by Steve Ryfle. So that's the daughter of Nick Adams and the actor and the American producer, Henry Saperstein, who produced a lot of productions with Toho and things like Frankenstein Conquers the World and War of the Gargantuas. And they'll be talking about their father's work in Japan on these tokusatsu productions.
Excellent. Thank you, Kyle. Matt, what can people expect after that?
So at 12 p.m. Pacific, which is 3 p.m. Eastern, John DeSentis will be interviewing Mr. Bob Eggleton, the award-winning artist, and he's going to be talking about the history and evolution of kaiju-themed art. Then that will be followed at 1 p.m. Pacific and 4 p.m. Eastern with posters and promotion in kaiju films with authors Sean Linkenbach of The Art of Japanese Monsters and Ed Gottschalski of the Illustrated Encyclopedia of Godzilla and, of course, the Ishiro Honda biography. And that will be moderated by Mr. Kyle Yount of Kaiju Cast and Collect All Monsters. That will be followed by my own panel on Expo 70. We're going to be talking about the 1970 World Expo in Osaka, Japan. And I will be joined by Stan Hyde and Kevin Derendorf for that panel. That takes place at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. And then at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, there will be an interview with Mr. award-winning Bear McCreary, who is the composer for Walking Dead and, of course, the recent Godzilla King of the Monsters. And that will be moderated by John DeSentis and Erik Homenick himself.
Thank you so much. Kyle Gilmore, what can people expect after that for tomorrow?
Well, continuing on Saturday at 4 Pacific time, that's 6 Central and 7 Eastern time, we will join John DeSentis and Erik Homenick as they interview award-winning composer of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, and Godzilla Tokyo SOS, Michiru Oshima, about reviving the King of the Monsters musically for a new millennium. Then, at 5 Pacific, 7 Central, 8 Eastern, Steve Ryfle will chat with Japan-based writer and filmmaker Norman England as he discusses the making of his independent sci-fi satire, The Idol, and his upcoming book detailing his adventures on the sets of numerous kaiju and other films. And then finally, to end the day in a really big way, at 6 Pacific time, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, we join Steve Ryfle once again as he interviews the acclaimed director of the 90s Gamera trilogy, Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack, and Death Note, Shusuke Kaneko, so you don't want to miss any of that. Saturday is going to be a big day.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Now, Steve, preview for us what we've got on Sunday. Just give the Pacific times. You're on mute, Steve.
Yes, I am. That's a common mistake. All right, so Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific, we're going to have an interview that I'll be doing with Brad Warner, who is a longtime employee, or was a longtime employee of Tsuburaya Productions in Japan. He's also an ordained Zen monk, and he's written extensively about his experiences both as a monk and at Tsuburaya. So that's going to be a really fascinating discussion. He's been really deeply involved in a lot of different productions in different ways. At 10 o'clock Pacific, Godzilla vs. Biollante, The Lost Commentary. This is basically a talk by Ed Gazichewski, who previously recorded a Blu-ray commentary for the very popular film Godzilla vs. Biollante, but the commentary was never released, so this is an opportunity for him to basically present that in sort of a lecture form. At 11 p.m. Pacific, we have a presentation called Atomic Requiem, Akira Ifukube's Atomic Bomb Trilogy, and that's going to be presented by our own Erik Homenick and Patrick Galvan, and that discusses 3 films that all were released shortly after the end of the occupation in Japan. And I won't spoil it for you, but they all have interlocking musical theme involving the composer Akira Ifukube. And then at 12 o'clock, we have a Pacific time. We have a presentation called Designing Godzilla 1994. This is really going to be a great opportunity to hear from 2 creature designers, Ricardo Delgado and Carlos Huante, who were the original creature designers on director Jan de Bont's unmade 1994 version of Godzilla that was in pre-production at TriStar Pictures before it was jettisoned. And that talk will be moderated by Sci-Fi Japan's Keith Aiken.
Yeah. All right, very good. Patrick Galvan, what can we expect after that?
On 1 p.m. Pacific time on Sunday, there will be a panel on the fan favorite Godzilla vs. Destroya, hosted by Kyle Byrd, Matt Parmley, and joining them will be authors Kevin Derendorf and John LeMay. Destroya is now a quarter of a century old, so they're going to do like a big deep dive in that film and its history and its production. After that, at 2 p.m. Pacific time, we have the Kaiju art of Matt Frank. Matt Parmley here will be talking to the artist and illustrator who has done stuff for IDW Comics and also was involved in the Arrow video Gamera set, which came out earlier this year. At 3 p.m. that day on Sunday, we're going to have an interview with the screenwriter Tab Murphy, who was nominated for an Oscar for Gorillas in the Mist, but for us, our interest was he wrote the screenplay for an unproduced sequel to Roland Emmerich's TriStar Godzilla film, and Steve will be moderating that interview.
All right, thank you so much, Patrick. And John, what can people expect at the very end of our convention on Sunday?
Okay, so closing out on Sunday, first at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, we have Man of Action, the films of Jun Fukuda. And our friends Patrick Galvan and Steve Ryfle are going to be joined by Stuart Galbraith. And they're going to sort of look at this director who directed, I think 4 Godzilla movies and has always kind of been overlooked, but he really contributed a lot to the series. So that's going to be really interesting to kind of talk about him. 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, we have an interview with, and I hope I'm saying his last name right, Patrick Macias. And Patrick is an author. His book is Tokyo Scope, the Japanese cult film companion. And he has a forthcoming book called An Eternal Thought in the Mind of Godzilla. So Steve will be moderating that and interviewing Patrick about his writing. And then to close the entire weekend out at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern on Sunday, we have Shinji Higuchi. That's a guy who really doesn't need any introduction, but if you do need a refresher, started as the special effects director on the 90s Gamera film, sort of kind of completely revitalized and sort of reinvented the way that we thought about the special effects in these movies in the 1990s, and really went on to kind of carve out a career as a successful director, and most recently worked on Attack on Titan, Sinking in Japan, and Shin Godzilla. So that's going to be moderated by Steve Ryfle and Erik Homenick. And then after that, I guess we have our close.
That's right, and we'll be talking about the close a little bit later in the weekend. We need to wrap things up for our opening because we've got someone waiting to give our first masterclass, Shinichi Wakasa. So to everyone out there, thank you very much for attending our welcome and orientation. Stay tuned for Steve Ryfle and Shinichi Wakasa.